It seems like President Trump very much willing to put the whole discussion on Huawei through these trade negotiations. It seems like the whole national security concerns are now being fused with trade as well. How dangerous is that?
You know, Yvonne, trade has been an issue in the trade war, arguably the biggest issue in the trade war for months and months. It's really come to the forefront in recent days. The White House blacklisting Huawei and scores of its global affiliates from trying to restrict their access to the U.S. market. Now you're hearing an increase in rhetoric from Trump. He's saying it's dangerous. He's saying it could end up as part of a trade deal. And China has pushed back against that pretty hard. The Commerce Ministry, of course, came out yesterday, and they accused the U.S. of wrecking the trade deal. And they said the U.S. needs to show sincerity, needs to bring something else to get back to the table.
Yeah, take us through Beijing's response, because there is this kind of lingering concern of what they can do next. We haven't heard too much yet, but some say they could do the same thing with Apple as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And China has raised its rhetoric in recent days. You're hearing Xi Jinping say even earlier this week that his people need to really dig in for the long haul. It's going to be a long road ahead. You're hearing this increase in rhetoric in state media from the Commerce Ministry. There is no sign from Beijing that this is going to be resolved soon, and there's no sign from the White House either.
Professor Miles, what's your take on all this at this moment? Do you think we're likely to get anything by G20?
Well, it's very disappointing because the trade war between China and the US doesn't have a winner. I mean, everybody loses from this. I think it's very sad that the economic logic behind the position of the US president seems a bizarre one. The view that because there's a bilateral deficit between the US and China, that shows somehow the US is losing, being cheated. Doesn't make much economic sense. I think the one good thing, if there is a good thing about this, is that there are very few other countries in the world that trade with China that take the same view. My country, the UK, we have a large trade deficit between the UK and China, but nobody in the UK, certainly nobody in the UK government, thinks that's a sign that the UK is somehow losing out. And maybe this economic madness will end sooner than that.
Professor Miles, this is David here in Hong Kong.
Hello.
Great name we have, right? 10, 15 years from now, do we look back at these events and look at the tariffs as, I guess, a means to the end, at least as far as Donald Trump is concerned, and correcting the imbalances, whether that's tech, forced transfers of such, or just the sort of flow of goods? And do you think, looking at it through that prism, there is merit?
Well, I think there may be merit in one aspect of this, which is the sort of forced sharing of intellectual property for companies that may want to do foreign direct investment into China, and that's maybe the one aspect of this where there's some merit in the tough US position. I think where there's no merit whatsoever is the view that because the US imports more from China than it exports to China, that somehow that's an unfair practice, that's an imbalance that causes a problem, that harms the US. That, I think, is outright economic nonsense. And I don't think that idea will persist for very long.
How would you have approached the imbalance, then, if you had to give a policy prescription?
Well, I think the economic mistake is to think that an imbalance in trade between one country and one other country is itself a sign that the country that has the deficit is being somehow cheated. It's perfectly possible for one country to have a huge imbalance with another and a deficit, but then a surplus with a third country, and overall it's imbalanced. Furthermore, there's no problem for sometimes protracted periods, countries running an overall deficit. It simply means that other countries are willing to accumulate financial claims on it. So the whole economic view that there's a problem with a bilateral deficit that lasts for a long time is, as I've said, simply economic nonsense.
Karen, what's at stake now from each side?
Needless to say, the stakes are huge. Xi is coming off of a year of economic turmoil. He's in the middle of a hugely political sensitive time. We're a couple weeks out from the anniversary of Tiananmen Square. The 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China is in the fall. And Trump is looking ahead to 2020. And the tariffs are going to hurt key constituencies like farmers. They can hurt the Rust Belt, which helped elevate him to the presidency. And the IMF coming out yesterday and saying that really it's Chinese and American consumers who are going to be hit the worst by this trade war. So there's a lot at stake for both leaders, and the fact that they haven't been able to come to an agreement really shows the key differences between them.
And David, U.S. Commerce Department just a couple hours ago was proposing this latest measure of potentially putting tariffs on countries that manipulate their currencies. Is this trade war slowly shifting into a currency one?
Well, it might do that. Of course, I think it's difficult to accuse countries unambiguously of manipulating their currency. I find it not very convincing to argue that China has been trying to keep its currency down. And so...
It's hard to enforce, as you're saying. Yeah.
Well, it's not just hard to enforce. I think it's hard to prove that there's a crime going on here. And particularly, I don't see any clear evidence that there's a crime committed by China vis-à-vis the US in this particular area.